Hello, everybody. It's always great to connect with you. Good to see you. And today, in what has been an incredibly busy week, I want to look at the issue of higher education. I'm quite excited. It's a passion of mine. Education is something I'm deeply, and I'm working in a process of completing my own studies. So, therefore, watch out, watch the space. In the next couple of weeks, I'll be making a big announcements about some of the studies I've undertaken. So, education matters to me. It matters in many ways, but also education has its own intrinsic value. It helps you develop cognitive skills, helps you develop the confidence to know that the circumstances of your birth don't really determine where you're going to end up. Education and higher education gives us the options that we need in life, the choice to whether South Africa can compete with another country or not. We benchmark this against higher education. But let's be honest. Our higher education system here in this country is facing an incredible crisis. And I want to look at this very subject today about the linkage between education in its intrinsic value and also education in its extrinsic value. That means, what is the job that education is meant to deliver at the end of the day? It's a mismatch in this country that, in fact, many degreed individuals are still finding themselves at home. It tells us that you've got the first problem, which is that you send people to higher education and, frankly, for the jobs that do not exist. Now, I am one who could be very critical of this. My first degree was a BA in psychology. I can remember that all too well. It was in community psychology. But I'm not sure what job that is, right? Either I'd continue doing psychology to its fullest end, but frankly, I didn't have a job for it. It's a bit like people who enter the higher education space to do biblical studies or do theology. All of these things are helpful, and I'm not against theology, certainly one who has read the Bible and certainly believe in the Bible, but I certainly don't necessarily think that our higher education system needs more pastors, for argument's sake, that are coming through that process. So, and I'm not anti the arts. I'm merely just saying that we've got to think hard as a country about what skills we need and how do we link them up. Take one practical example. We've seen that in financial services, our country has seen incredible growth in terms of its own contribution to GDP. Therefore, you would swear our higher education system need to be producing more graduates in this space. You would look at sectors like agriculture. We all know that agriculture today is not a matter of just farming in the age-old way of going out onto the field. We now talk hydroponics. We talk multiple pieces of technology. So it makes agriculture a fairly technical, computer analyzed skill. So that requires a different discipline. We can look at sectors like mining and how we deal with certainly engineers in that regard and equipment that is required in this instance, and how do we produce graduates who can do things like drilling, who can make sure that they are able to ensure that we are able to produce skills that can contribute to our mining sector, which, to be honest with you, has an opportunity to create more jobs, but it is incapable of being able to do so because ultimately we don't have the skills based and ultimately the economic opportunities to do so. So here is the first argument I want to make, is that if South Africa is going to address its two problems, the first one is a problem of growth, the second one is a problem of inequality, I would argue those sit on a U-shape, and therefore ultimately as economy grows, sometimes inequality exacerbates because those who grow are often the ones with the skills and they've got the networks, and so they continue to grow, but those without the skills get left behind. Our job now is to build a higher education system that develops young people who are able to maximize those opportunities. So, what then are the problems? What are the hindrances? Let's first of all consider the first, which is the issue of the budget. Is higher education funded sufficiently? I don't think so. I think relative to the number of spaces that are available and the number of students trying to apply, those numbers don't line up. But just so you know, ultimately, the Education Department has got university transfers of about 48 billion rand. The National Student Financial Aid Scheme, NSFAS, which is 55.4 billion rands. The Skills Development Levy Institute is about 27.9 billion rand. And TVET colleges, or Technical and Vocational Education and Training, is about 14.2 billion rand. So it ultimately means on the higher education front, we're spending close to about 146 billion rand annually. And so what would you do if you had the resources to be able to use those. Whilst they're not enough, I certainly think that we could think creatively about how do we get bang for buck. I've had engagements with the National Student Financial Aid Scheme Board and figured out the fact that ultimately there are high levels of corruption that take place, which means that at the end of the day, money that was meant for students gets absorbed into administrative costs. And so there is a genuine question about whether the elimination of something like NSFAS and capacitating universities to be able to absorb students would not be something that's helpful. But that debate must continue, because ultimately what we've got to try and get right is more students at university. When you look at the racial makeup of students that are going to university, Africans make up the least at 4%, and other races tend to be more participation in university. So we've got to focus on saying if we're going to achieve justice in our country and inclusion, higher education is a key one. The second is, like everyone has been speaking, is the issue of leadership. Now, the Minister of Higher Education has clearly had a number of challenges of late. One of them being deliberately or whatever misleading Parliament on the appointments that were made in boards. So that is a serious issue. Firstly, no one can mislead Parliament and get away with it. Secondly, the appointment in those seaters seems to be a genuine challenge with people who are personally connected and how they get appointed. Now, when I look at the minister's leadership, this is an important question. Does she have a vision for how to transform higher education or not? And I would argue not. In fact, when I look at some of the appointments, it became quite clear the fact that she didn't want a team of people who were going to lead higher education for the future. She wanted people with political connections. Now, should she remain in her job? I think she shouldn't. I think that the Minister of Higher Education needs to step aside from the role. It's fundamentally because I think it's important that we have a leadership that can appreciate the extrinsic value of what happens in higher education. She further claims to have appointed Advocate Terry Mutau as the chairperson position of the independent panel, but in essence, he has to issue an apology for the misrepresentation she has made. Many of the people who sat on that panel to select members sat, in fact, in some of her office, and ultimately it undermines the credibility of the process in its entirety. So, should she stay? I maintain she should go. What happens after this? There's another question I want to raise, which is this issue of then fighting against her budget vote. Let me explain. I have gone out of my way to get a legal opinion about whether you can be selective about which budget votes you support and which ones you don't. And in truth, no parliamentarian has the right to be able to play noughts and crosses with a budget. The appropriation bill is both in schedules of vote 1 to vote 41 or 40, and then ultimately it is considered as a whole bill for adoption. If you then don't vote on certain items, those items must come back to the Committee of Appropriations. The only thing that the Committee on Appropriations can consider is whether the appropriation is enough or whether the programs work or not. So it becomes a bit arbitrary that you will bring the amendment of the bill on finance to an appropriation committee because you've rejected it to deal with the political leadership rather than, in fact, the appropriation itself. I would urge, if you actually want to hold the minister accountable, that is the job of the president. That is the job of the leader of government business about whether she has lied or not lied, or how the process of appointments was done. You can deal with a motion of censure. You can do all of those things. But what you cannot do is hold the budget ransom, because that would mean the entire budget has to be referred back to the Committee on Appropriations or National Appropriations. The Appropriations Bill is in fact the horizontal allocation of departments nationally, not vertically. So we're not dealing with provinces or municipalities. We're just dealing with it horizontally with the national departments, which would mean in fact that even budgets on agriculture, public works, education, all of those would also have to be delayed. And here is then the problem, is that once that occurs, we don't have 10 days to deal with the issue. So therefore, it means from the 1st of August, departments would only have 40% to spend relative to what they have in their budgets. And there's no government department nationally that has a budget that is less than 40% in terms of salaries. Therefore, it would mean that department is wholly rendered useless. So, all I'm saying is that let's not play politics with people's lives. Because when it's said and done, if parties want to play noughts and crosses with the budget vote, it is not going to serve either them or the people of this country. Lastly, I think we need to think about the future of higher education. There are some stellar universities. I have to give a shout out to my alma mater, Wits University. Obviously, I've been studying at the University of Johannesburg. So these universities are held in high regard. But there are other universities, particularly in rural areas, that are not developing the kind of outcomes that we can think about. Think about Fort Hare, think about Walter Sisulu, and many of those. I do think we need to really think about how do we have a tiered system of higher education, make sure we strengthen the success stories, group together the ones that really need to focus on particular degrees so that they don't offer the entire program, creating a stress on resources, and make sure that we offer an opportunity to young people to choose which stream they want to end up at. Furthermore, I hold the absolute view that if we really are intentional about skills, TVET cannot be a lost aside issue. We need to be able to ensure that vocational training is linked. Already in South Africa, we've got a low level of manufacturing. We don't have ultimately skills to ensure that people can be able to do certain apprenticeship programs, etc. This is a massive opportunity that we need to have. So I don't hold the Minister of Higher Education accountable just for the parliamentary stuff. It's the lack of vision for how we can see higher education transform the sector, transform our economy, and make sure young South Africans who are left behind can participate. So I'll be going to the budget vote. We'll have this discussion, and ultimately it will come back to our committee if it is not approved in the National Assembly, and then we'll take it from there. I wish you well. I want to say to all our graduates at home, the fight here is to make sure that we get more graduates into schools, whether those are unemployed doctors, unemployed nurses, unemployed teachers. And I'm really keen to see that our locations in these regards can absorb more and more people. Let's make sure we build an economy that is growing so that our graduates can have a future. And ultimately, the fight is on. I love you lots. Speak to you soon. Sha.